In this episode of the Photography News podcast, there's macro inspiration, digital manipulation, and a girl band invasion. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Photography News podcast, our 23rd. My name is Roger Payne. I'm the editorial director at Photography News. And we are recording on Monday, April the 12th, which, if you live in the UK, you will know well that this is a significant day as our lockdown eases a little bit further, hence the reason why we are recording a little bit later than usual. And in light of the lockdown easing and the reintroduction of the rule of six, I thought I would introduce my two colleagues and invite them to suggest 6 people that they would like to have a gathering with. So I'll start. I'm throwing this one straight at them. Now, I'm assuming, gentlemen, that we're going to be 3 of those 6 people because, hey, we all want to get together, don't we? They're all nodding. So let me start with, because he's scribbling the most furiously, contributing editor Kingsley Singleton. Morning, Kingsley. How are you?
I'm trying to think of how many people were there in Girls Aloud? Am I allowed that?
So it's the 3 of us and Girls Aloud. I think that might be
That'll
more
be too many then, won't it?
Yeah.
I need I've got girl groups with 3 people in. I don't know. You foxed me there.
Atomic Kitten?
Oh God, no.
Okay, we'll come back to you. And obviously joining Kingsley and myself is editor of Photography News, Mr. Will Chung. Hi, Will.
Hi, Rog. Hi, Kingsley.
How many? Right. So who's in your gathering of 6?
Well,
me, obviously, apart from myself.
Apart from you two, which of course does help a great deal. But I've gone for a sporting theme.
Interesting.
Because I'm a Spurs supporter, as you know, and of course there's a lot of gossip about Harry Kane at the moment and where he should go to win trophies. Because clearly my side won't win anything. So I would like Harry Kane there.
Right.
It's still on the sporting theme because we had the first woman jockey winner of the Grand National, Rachel Blackmore. So I'd love to just chat to her because she's awesome, even though I didn't win any money on her. And also I need the interpreter here, but I also like Hideki Matsuyama there because he's the first Japanese man to win a major and the Masters. So apart from you two, my table is going to have a very sporting theme.
Indeed.
Right.
Kingsley, do you want to come back with anything slightly more considered than Atomic Kitten? Or are we just going to move straight on?
I think we move on. No, hang on. What about yours?
Oh, I haven't given it any thought.
Oh, right, okay.
You two.
Oh, cheat.
Excellent. Well, lovely to have you both along. And as is standard, we will dive straight into chatting about what we've been shooting over the last couple of weeks. And Kingsley, I'll come to you first, because in our pre-podcast chat, it seemed that you had been the busiest of the 3 of us in terms of photography. So why don't you start by telling us what you've been up to? Sounds quite intriguing.
I have. I don't know about other listeners, but even the short forays I've had out to do stuff, I'm finding absolutely exhausting. So you go out for about 15 minutes, come back and need to recline for at least a couple of hours. But I've been doing some portrait shoots with the Z7 II and 85mm 1.8, which I got for that, and I've also been I've put it to good use on some local political candidates who needed some mug shots doing and some group shots and also some video. So I don't shoot a lot of video, but I was sort of reminded in doing the video how useful it is having that option. I'm aware that I have previously on this very podcast said, for God's sake, if I could buy a camera and save $1,000 and it didn't have 4K video on it or something, I would probably do it. But in this occasion, actually, it was very useful.
So tell us a little bit about the video setup. Have you been? Is it all sort of handheld and you've been relying on in-body image stabilization, or have you been slightly more considered than that?
Well, I did that thing where, I think probably a lot of people do. I got a load of kit out and thought like, well, I could use that. And then I just did it the old-fashioned way, and I took basically a regular tripod with a video head on it, even though I wasn't actually moving. There was no movement in it whatsoever. It was locked off And then I also I sort of avoided some of the more modern features. Like I was kind of expecting myself to pitch up and use like the eye detection AF for the video, but then I kind of thought, well, I've never actually tested that. So, and because it has to work first time, I thought, well, I'll just manually focus, because that's what I've always done for those kind of talking head type video things. You lock it off, you tell your subject not to move around too much, you shoot at around f4, 5, 6 to give them a bit of depth of field, and then you're kind of okay.
And what about from a portraits perspective? Presumably the camera was more at home with that. I mean, how's it kind of worked over the two disciplines? Did you find it was more at home shooting stills, or did you find that it was pretty easy to move seamlessly between the two?
Oh no, I mean, I very much the hybrid approach. It's like, you do realize it when you start to use those cameras, how quickly and easily they do switch from one to the other. The only thing that let the procedure down was me. So that's kind of
because you fell over or what?
I did not on this occasion. No, I was it was more that I was sort of forgetting things, in terms of like I was having to remember a lot of it on the fly, basically. So I was sort of thinking like, oh, hang on, what's my kind of baseline video technique? Okay, shoot in manual, double the shutter speed for the frame rate, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I was almost kind of undergoing like a crash course while I was doing it. So, but it turned out pretty well.
And have the local political candidates been pleased with what you have produced, or have you yet to show it to them?
Well, they were very pleased. I mean, whether they actually get elected off the back of it, I guess will be the proof of the pudding, won't it?
And presumably your bill will go up accordingly,
But considering their political affiliations and the historical voting practices of my area, I would suggest that my video won't matter that much.
Right.
Can I ask, Kingsley, did you take a microphone sound setup and lights and all that sort of thing?
So again, I didn't take lights, but I did take a mic. In fact, I took two mics, one of which was a radio mic that I turned up with. I had a bag full of AA batteries to make sure nothing ran out. Turned up and realised these things ran off 9-volt batteries. Naturally, I came prepared because I had another mic, which was just one of those ones that records to an external recorder. So I was recording into the camera and also into a separate device. And I realised this is a podcast about photography, but one of the big wow factors is that you just slap the audio and the footage into Adobe Premiere, highlight them and hit synchronize, and they just line up perfectly. So no clapperboards required.
Excellent stuff. Excellent. Well, that sounds very good. Glad to hear that you were out and about so much, and sorry to hear that you've been tired. But I know what you mean. I know what you mean about like going out and exerting any form of energy seems to be extremely, extremely tiring. And we were discussing shortly before we started recording that we were all a little bit tired. So it must be the exuberance of being able to get out and do a little bit more. Speaking of which, Will. I believe that you've been out testing kit a little bit. Is that right?
Yeah, and just to go on the tired theme, I don't want to be left out here, but I'm just tired and I've done nothing. I've just watched TV and eat. But apart from that, I do feel tired. But yes, I have been testing kit. I haven't done much of my own personal photography for the last few weeks, or last few months even. But I did go to Cambridge last week, which is my nearest city. I had a couple of things to test. I had the Tamron 70-300mm lens, which is the world's lightest lens of that range for a mirrorless camera. And I've also had the Canon EOS M50 Mark II for test. So I took those into Cambridge the other day, and I spent a couple of hours out, which was nice. Very quiet, obviously, because the pubs weren't open then. And on my desk right now, I've got some more items which I need to test. So I have a Fujifilm X-E4 in front of me here, and I've also got an RX lens, which is a 45mm 1.4 for the Fujifilm GFX system. So those are on my desk at the moment, and they need testing. So I will get out sometime this week, avoiding city centres now, because of course all the shops are open. But I'll find somewhere to go and walk and wear myself out.
And so your initial findings of the cameras and the products that you went into Cambridge with are what, Will? Are you impressed by what you saw?
Yeah, I mean, indeed I am. I mean, to be fair, the Canon EOS M50 is a Mark II, but there are hardly any changes compared with Mark I. And when I tested Mark I, I quite enjoyed it for what it was. A relatively low entry point mirrorless camera, APS-C format. So the Mark II, like I said, the sensor's the same, so I know the quality is going to be good. I enjoyed using it. And the Tamron 7300, yeah, I mean, I was very impressed with that because I was using it on a Sony A7R4, which is a 61 megapixel camera. And the quality I was getting off the lens for the money, because it's a lens which is £530 thereabouts, I thought was very impressive. So, yeah, I mean, I'm still processing the pictures, and these tests will be in issue 88, which is out in mid-May. And indeed, for the Fujifilm X-E4 test will also be in that issue too.
Well, interestingly enough, as if a perfect link, you may remember a couple of podcasts ago, I mentioned that I got an XE4 to try out. Well, my trial went so well that I've actually plumped for one and went out and bought one. They're now available in the UK. I went for it with the XF 27mm, the weather resistant one, and then I've also bought the little thumb rest which sits on the back and the grip as well, which I think Kingsley said was a necessity, as I recall you suggested. So I, of course, typically what I did is after going out and buying that is I left it in the box for probably about 10 days. And then suddenly thought I didn't really want to come on the podcast and admit that having bought a new camera, I haven't actually gone out and used it. So as if by magic, I think myself and a number of other places around the UK woke up to a blanket of snow this morning, which was slightly unusual given that it's middle of April. So I took the opportunity and went out and wandered around on my dog walk with said camera and lens, photographing snowy scenes, because I'm sure they won't be repeated again for the rest of this year. I'm very happy with it, given, as I've said before, the camera that I had before was an X100S, which is quite slow by comparison in terms of focusing. The focusing on this is really quick. It all just works quickly. It switches on really quickly. It just operates quickly. I suppose it's just like sort of a few years of technological advancements really in the camera. I've also used it with the 18 to 135mm lens on it, and that's been quite interesting as well, because although that's quite a significantly bulkier and longer lens, it actually does feel quite nicely balanced on the camera. So that's sort of quite a nice sort of pleasant surprise, because I think you could use some of the Fujifilm sort of longer zooms on it without any great handling problems, but that's probably due to the fact that it's got the grip on it. And in fact, the only thing I'm not really happy about at the moment is the fact that the strap's not long enough. So,
is this something to do with lockdown weight gain, in that it won't now go around your circumference?
Well, it could be the fact that I went out this morning wearing multiple layers, including a sort of a quite a big jacket because it was blooming freezing. But it's also the fact that I've discovered this online. I've discovered this quite intriguing way of kind of triple threading I'm not going to try and show it to you, but I've discovered this way of kind of triple threading the strap, which does make it's just the strap straight out of the box, which I'm sure will upset Will. But it does make it far more solid, and there's no danger of it sort of unnecessarily coming undone. But obviously it shortens the strap a little bit. So it's not quite so easy to just sort of throw it around and raise it to your eye and take a picture. So maybe I will have to go out and buy a new strap for it.
It's a little bit more like who was that guitarist that played his guitar right up under his chin?
Oh yeah. I'm trying to think who that was then.
Whatever the camera equivalent of that is. Yeah. So I'm interested in this this kind of almost like 14-day cool down period between I think it should almost be a standardized like period of reflection and contemplation before you actually get to take the thing out.
Well, I must admit, I think part of it was down to the fact that I got into my head that the first picture that I was going to take with it had to be something good. And then, so I did take the camera out with me a few times, but didn't actually take any pictures because I thought, well, I've got to start as I mean to go on. So, but actually, in the end, I just gave up because that was never going to happen, obviously. So I just took any old average snap.
And what was the last camera you actually bought?
That's a good question. I mean, it probably will be, because the X100S was very kindly donated to me. So I think it would be the camera before that, which was an EOS 5D Mark II. So yeah, it's been a while. So it's a strange old feeling, isn't it, going out and buying equipment?
Maybe that's what the period of reflection is. It's kind of like the worry.
Yeah, should have bought some golf clubs. Yes, that's probably what I ended up thinking. moving on, will you, in the next issue, the issue 87 of Photography News, which I think is due out any day now because it went to press last week.
Yes.
You interviewed a lady called Tracy Calder, who is the co-founder of the Close-Up Photographer of the Year competition. And we thought, given that and given the relevance of that subject and the fact that we can now get out and about a little bit more, it would be a perfect time to have a chat about close-up photography. And before we delve into the practicalities of it and how you get ideas of what to shoot, can we start with a definition of what we mean by close-up photography? Will, do you have does the Close-Up Photographer of the Year competition have a definition of what that means, or is it just anything that you get close to with your camera?
I think if you started getting scientific about it, it's very difficult to quantify, and also in terms of judging, it'd be a nightmare if you started setting specific criteria, because you would need to get raw files and mess around and all sorts of things. But I think with the Close-Up Photographer of the Year contest, it is literally anything which is close up. So not specifically macro, which of course, from a if you like a scientific definition of macro, it should be life size, which is 1:1. But the close-up contest is not necessarily that, because there are pictures. I mean, for instance, one of the winners from last year was a picture of a butterfly on a wall of peeling paint, and that certainly is not what I call macro, but certainly is a close-up. So I think anything which you've zoomed into and just gone for a tighter frame, let's not get too fixated on this. It's just, close-up photography, not macro photography.
So Kingsley, with his famed 300mm choice, lens of choice, is a shoe-in to the Close-Up Photographer of the Year. Kingsley, would you surely you've entered?
Trying to think what the closest focusing of that lens, like 1.5 meters, isn't it? So I wonder actually whether you could suggest that a 300mm lens at its closest focusing distance might be a close-up. I don't know. No,
I think you can, because as a random example, as you mentioned that, when I went to shoot polar bears a couple of years ago in Churchill, I had a Nikon 500mm lens. We were on the tundra buggies photographing bears, and they came right up to us. And the bears were standing up against the vehicle, and we were on the vehicle platform looking down. And I had the 500mm lens, I had it held above me using live view to try and get a picture of the bear's eye because it was so close. And I just managed to get far enough away from it. So by that definition, the 300mm will work too. So don't rule it out. I think it'd be a good close-up lens. And of course, you could get very minimal depth of focus, depth of field with it too. So you can get quite creative with it.
So what we've ascertained here is that you don't need a specialist lens to photograph close-ups. Any lens that you own has got a close-up focusing point, and so therefore you could use that. So this competition theoretically is open to anybody and everybody who's got a camera, including me with my 27mm on my new Fujifilm X-E4. So what about ideas then, Kingsley? So in terms of, we talked around this a little bit before we started recording, but you were quite animated, shall we say, about inspiration and ideas for what you should photograph close up, because you don't feel that somebody should just go into their kitchen drawer, dig out some forks and spoons and take a picture, do you?
Well, and that's not quite what I said.
Well, it is.
I thought it was an accurate depiction of what you said, Kingsley.
Yeah. Well, here's your chance to set the record straight, Kingsley.
My point was that if they were sufficiently inspired by a fork and a spoon and took sufficient care over it, then it would be a perfectly valid thing to do. My point was about actually kind of trying to kind of dive into an area where that pulls your heartstrings a little bit. So like if you, for instance, like cutlery, then that's a perfectly valid subject. My problem, which I was banging on about, was that having judged numerous or almost innumerable macro competitions over the years for magazines and things, was that what you tended to get a lot of was sort of really tired looking pictures of flies and stuff, just like things that people you imagine had kind of like wandered out and thought, well, I need a close up of something small. What's something small? Oh, there's something small. And then just it's like there's no love in it. So your example of cutlery, if someone is into that and they make something really cool out of it, and they maybe they treat the metal to, they oil the metal and they set up the fork and the cutlery or whatever on a piece of slate, and they make it look, and they really throw their heart into it. I'm all for it. It's just, I just hate flies.
He's talking nonsense here, isn't he, Will? Because surely, go on, Will.
No, I just think he's overthinking this. I mean, that's the way he prefers to work. Doesn't mean it works for everybody else. And I think the competition and certainly photographic magazines in general promoted close-up as a way, for instance, to encourage people to see pictures. And I was inspired by people, this photographer called Ernst Haas back in the 70s. He went around New York photographing just decaying posters. And that got me looking into it, because what you were seeing was just wonderful patterns. And I think, you know, rather than get all het up about it in the Kingsley way, I think you just go free your vision and just, I mean, you talked about the minimum focus of your lens, but if you want to get inspired and you're not so familiar with the close-up facility on your cameras, just set manual focus, set the minimum focus, and move the camera to subject rather than finding a subject. But try it with some cutlery, try it with some flowers, try it with some food, some vegetables, and just set the thing up, just to experiment. Absolutely. And you move the camera into the subject as opposed to thinking, oh, I've got to do a close-up of this. And just try different apertures and try, the traditional with close-ups is, of course, to use a smallish aperture for good depth of field. But my take on it would be set a wide aperture and go for some nice bokeh and just get some creativity into your shots. So I'm not as blinkered as Kingsley, because he's very, very blinkered.
I'm definitely coming from your side of the fence as well, Will, because I remember when I first had a macro lens and just photographing everything with it, because everything seemed to be like really, really interesting when you get a one-to-one on it and focus really close. And one of my most favorite pictures that I think I've ever taken was when I got up really early one morning, went out, it was when I was doing my 365 project, went out and found some damselflies, which were still laden down with early morning dew, and spent probably about half an hour chasing a little damselfly, which every time I tried to photograph it from the side, it almost knew that I was trying to do that, and it would sort of edge round so I could only ever photograph it front on. I got what I wanted in the end, but that I'm not a damselfly fan in particular. So where does that work?
What you're describing is the voyage of discovery, which is perfectly valid. However, you have to get to a certain point for it to be an interesting picture. So, in terms of the voyage of discovery, I might think it's interesting walking down, a new road in my town, but I'm not going to write a book about it. I'm not going to send it off to a competition. It's like you have to kind of find something that is your thing, and then you can throw yourself into it heart and soul, and you can excel at it. And that, I think, is what judges of competitions, they don't want to see, oh, Roger's just got a macro lens, here he is taking the pictures at the top of his pen. Oh, Roger, you're on a voyage of discovery. Well done.
Well, I think, but voyage of discovery, that's the whole thing about photography, though, isn't it? And the whole process of, I'm looking around me, and there's anything that I can look at on my desk. I've got a keyboard, I've got, a bottle of water, I've got a mug, I've got a smart speaker, I've got all sorts of things. And any one of those things would make a good close-up image if I actually invested the time and effort in making it into a good image.
But that may take some considerable time, considering the subjects you've just named, I would say. Perhaps this is where we should reveal Tracy coming in as a special guest to kind of bang the gavel down on this discussion.
I think it's an interesting point. I mean, I do recall that macro photography, when I first started doing it, and close-up photography when I first started doing, was just like an exciting new world that I hadn't seen before. And even today on my snowy dog walk this morning, one of the things I photographed was close-up images of blossom on the hedgerow, and of course what I do is I take the image and then I blow it up on the rear screen. It's like, look at the detail in the petals on that bit of blossom, and I just think that's a really, that's a nice picture. And yeah, it's not going to win any competitions, but it was an enjoyable process to go through. So anyway, let's not get too bogged down and argumentative. Otherwise, people will be switching off if they haven't already with your atomic kitten references. But,
you brought them up.
Oh, that's true. Well, I was only trying to help you out. So let's talk a little bit more about techniques, because I think that would be good to get a little bit more detail about when we do take close-up images, macro images, how we go about doing that. Because I mean, presumably will all the same things apply in terms of lighting, in terms of sharpness, in terms of composition, etc. So where would you start from a macro perspective or a close-up perspective when it comes to those things?
Well, have we assumed we've got a macro lens, or are we assuming we haven't got a macro lens? Are we talking lenses, extension tubes, bellows, lighting, the whole thing, or have you assumed some knowledge already and some expertise and some kit?
Well, what would you like the listeners to have? Would you like them to have a modicum of kit? I mean, I don't think we want anything too specialist to start with. I would suggest that let's assume that they're just going to, as we discussed earlier, they're just going to go out with a camera and a lens that has a close focusing capability, and they just want to start seeing images and capturing images. What's your suggestion for them?
Well, I think there's nothing wrong with starting with just the standard zoom and using its minimum focus. Of course, if you want to get closer, extension tubes is probably the easiest way to do that. They're relatively cheap as well. I mean, I've got a set for my Nikon Z7 recently, and to be fair, they're not substantial. They're quite plasticky, but there's no mechanics needed inside. There's no optics. All you're doing is extending the lens, moving away from the lens body to get the camera body to give you a closer focusing distance. So if you find you want to get closer once you've tried it, then extension tubes is the way to go. But I think for me, depending how you shoot, but a support of some sort is useful, be that a tripod or be that a monopod. I've got the shakes, I think that's probably why I need a tripod. But also, I just like the slower way of working. So last autumn, when I was doing fungi, I did use a tripod to get me down low to try different angles. And I mean, we mentioned the new issue earlier, but Vanguard has just launched a new brand of travel tripods, and the inclusive function of theirs called MACC, which is multi-angle center column. And that's featured on various of its VAO tripods. So have a look on Vanguard's website for more details. But the tripod means you can basically angle the center column at any angle you want. So if you have got something up against, let's say, a tree, which is a different angle, awkward angle, or if you want to shoot flat lay, this tripod allows you to get that angle and get a sharp picture from it. So I think extension tubes, a tripod of some sort, and lighting. I mean, a lot of people use these little small LED lights you can buy. I mean, Manfrotto have them, the Lumimuse. They're USB chargeable. They're quite pokey little things. They've got 7 LEDs or 8 LEDs. I think the top of the range one's got Bluetooth, so it's app controllable. So if you need about a splash of light, because we're not always guaranteed good light in this country, then get a small light. But you don't need much to get you going on the close-up route. And you said it, Rog. Just go for the standard zoom with its minimum focus. I mean, what would you recommend?
Well, I was going to come to Kingsley because presumably he's going to rubbish all of what you've just said and be completely contrary.
Against I know.
Kingsley, do you agree with anything that your colleague has just suggested there, or are you hand holding and I don't know. I don't know what you want to be right now.
He's a wonderful man. He really is. No, I completely agree. I mean, I had an example of that the other day, in that I went to a local garden that had been opened up for one weekend, like a sort of a horticulturalist's kind of heaven. This kind of place was, and I don't actually have a macro lens, but I had my 24-70 Nikon Z lens, and that has the same minimum focus distance, whatever the focal length, and it'll focus down to about 30 centimeters from the sensor, I think, and that gives you like a 1:3 reproduction. And again, like you say, you get up close to some blossom, you can get some quite nice things. So I definitely don't think I wouldn't let I don't think you need to let kit get in the way of inspiration in that way. Although there is a certain kind of frisson of excitement that you do get when you use a proper macro lens and you start seeing things that you can't see with your naked eye. And if you go even closer, if you put an extension tube on a macro lens, then you increase the magnification even further. But what you've also got is lenses out there now. For years and years and years, the only widely available macro lens where you could get greater than life size was a Canon lens, wasn't it? It was a 5x Canon lens, but now Laowa, they do quite a few lenses, I think, that are kind of greater than life size magnification. And I was actually looking at one the other day, which had recently come out in Z mount. I think it was about £400 or £500.
65mm.
Interesting. So in terms of getting all your kit right and getting your technique right, what about your composition? I mean, because are there?
I don't bother with
that. Well, no surprise there. So do the same sort of compositional rules apply as they would do if you were taking a portrait or a landscape, or do you think that, for example, with macro, you need to have your subject central in the frame, or do close-up images work better that way?
I don't think there's a hard and fast rule to it. One thing I would say is that when you start shooting close-ups, you are kind of going to notice a lot more stuff in the frame, and you have to be quite particular about what gets included and what doesn't, in the way that you can still be quite selective, and that's why some people kind of use longer focal length macro lenses. But what I mean is, getting that close, you start to discover things that kind of can look a bit grotty. So like if you're shooting, like a watch face or something, people will take the back off a watch, won't they, and shoot the gears and stuff inside it. I've done that before, and I've always found a dog hair after. You don't notice it really, unless, you can zoom in on the screen as you're taking it and you can have a look around. But it's one of those well kind of versed tips that people say about macro photography, but cleaning what you're shooting, or at least paying attention to kind of what's on it, is huge, because these kind of like an eyelash on a watch face looks like a tree trunk by the time you're focused that closely. But I mean, like in terms of general composition, I think it's the same deal as anything. It's kind of having your subject reasonably large in the frame, which it probably would be anyway if it's a macro thing, and then you can use all sorts of compositional devices to kind of, depending on where you want to place it, how you want the eye to move through the frame. And as Will was saying, in terms of lighting, lighting is a huge part of professional macro photography, and can be in sort of enthusiast macro photography as well. So like if you want to go back to that watch face, for instance, and you can do things like just get a simple torch and put a bit of tape around the end of it to kind of focus the beam down, just light up one tiny part of your subject, and then you're doing the same thing effectively that you're doing if you were setting up lights in a studio for a still life or a portrait.
You're nodding away there, Will. I'm not sure if you're just nodding off, or whether you're... Are you agreeing with what Kingsley has to say there for the first time this podcast?
He makes obviously some very, very good points, and yeah, the points of composition are important, just like any other forms of photography, and certainly with things like close-up. I mean, he's mentioned this hair on the back of his watch, but things like highlights are very distracting when you start moving and doing close-ups, because you get this nice bokeh, this out of focus highlight effect as you move in close, and the highlights get really nice, but they can also be distracting. So one thing, if you are doing insects, just not only keep an eye on the subject, but keep an eye on what's behind the subject. So that's just like portrait photography. We do the same there. And if there are annoying highlights, then if you can deal with them in processing is one thing, but just move if you can. That's the easiest way of doing it. And depth of field, of course. And if you can check your depth of field, do a test shot, check if you've got enough depth of field. If you haven't got enough depth of field, then stop down, or consider techniques like focus stacking if the subject is suitable for that technique. So
I was going to come on to focus stacking, because that's obviously a function that increasingly is available on cameras. Now, I've had a go at it and failed quite miserably, to be honest. So there are some. Well, Kingsley, maybe you can, because I think you mentioned earlier that you've got it on a Nikon camera that you own. So what are the do's and don'ts in terms of like subject choice for a start? So it's got to be something that's static. Does it have to any other constituents that it needs to have to make a successful stack?
I think one of the things about focus stacking is, there's different types of focus stacking and different ways that you can help your macro close-up process through kind of focusing. it doesn't actually have to be focus stacking. Some cameras now have a focus bracketing option, which is kind of almost like a halfway house towards focus stacking, because what that does is it just takes, like it would with exposure bracketing, it takes, you know, a shot slightly focused further away and a shot slightly focused further back towards the camera, so that you make sure you don't miss something. Now you can then blend those exposures together, but proper focus stacking is like, you know, 30, 40, 50 exposures, all focused with minute changes throughout the kind of the thing. And yeah, you're right, kind of obviously your composition has to be the same, so it's not something that you can do handheld. It's quite kind of exacting. One of the things that I've noticed when doing it before is that people will shoot like a bug on a stem or something, and what they'll do is they'll get the bug and then they'll forget about the rest of it. And what happens then is you get like a really nasty hard cut off in focus, and that looks really, really kind of odd. So it's a technique that's much better if you can get the whole of the subject against a background that's not in focus. So if you've got a lot of kind of recession in depth, it's a really difficult thing to manage.
Well,
does that
Bill,
make sense?
have you had no, it does make sense. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I suppose we probably should have started with a definition of what we were actually talking about. So thank you for adding that in halfway through your answer there. But Will, have you, anything to add from your no doubt lengthy experience of doing focus bracketing stroke stacking?
I have done some focus stacking, did some with on landscapes, and that can work really well if using a longish lens on a scene. I think the thing is also to bear in mind that, you know, there's focus stacking, but it doesn't change the law of physics. So sometimes you might have a bright highlight, for instance, and when you focus stack with that bright highlight, it can look terrible. And don't expect to cover a huge distance and look effective on the stacking once you've done it. So I think you have to be realistic. It's no different from depth of field, where people expect, you know, they stop down to f/22 and expect, you know, everything is sharp from 1 centimeter to infinity, but they haven't borne in mind what lens they're using, for example. So stacking is an acquired technique, and also you need software to do it as well. And there are specialist softwares. I've been using Affinity Photo, which is not a specialist stacking software, but it's a very general editing software. But that works really well. So I've done a few landscape stacks, not close-up stacks, because I haven't found anything that stays still long enough for me to stack it. But I know my partner Annie, she's an insect photographer, and she tried to do insect stacks. And you know, obviously, if you can get the thing still for a period of time, then do it. And Olympus cameras is one brand that, you know, they can do it in camera, so that can work really well. But I'll be doing focus stacking by focus bracketing, and that's using Nikon and Fujifilm cameras. And it can work really well with landscape. I mean, but equally, if you're careful with your focusing and your aperture choice, you can get really good depth of field anywhere and enough. So that covers subjects that are moving.
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of like focus stacking is one of those things that's like it's a bit like those aspects of astrophotography where you're sky stacking. It's like if it's not a requirement for having some fun and enjoying macro photography. It becomes a tool that you can use if you can't meet the need, you know, if you can't meet what you want to create with the lens and the kind of the technique that you've got. It's there if you need it. But the other thing is it takes quite a long time. So like one focus stack macro shot might take you, you know, an hour or something. By the time you've put it all together, and then you've worked out that, you know, said eyelash or lump of husky fluff is right there in the middle of your composition, and then suddenly it's like, oh, I missed that, so you now have to go back. So it's like it's quite a, you know, it's very much going down the kind of the scientific macro route, I think.
Well, as soon as we finish recording this podcast, I will go straight to my cutlery drawer and dig out a particularly well-marked fork to have a go at some focus bracketing. So just a reminder there. So the Close-Up Photographer of the Year, the website is cupoty.com. And the competition, which is currently running, it runs until the 23rd of May 2021. 1 minute to midnight is the absolute cutoff. So if you fancy getting involved with that, then obviously that's the website to go to. So we mentioned there, Will, that's in the latest issue of Photography News. Anything else that people should look out for? Race to their now reopened photo dealer to get a copy for?
Well, I was just thinking that you mentioned Close-Up Photographer of the Year contest, but there are several contests we mentioned in the magazine. We've got the Documentary Photographer of the Year, and that's run by the Royal Photographic Society. That's open to the 5th of August. Canon launched a competition called Canon Redline, and that closes on the 31st of May. And the final prize winner of that competition wins £14,000 worth of kit, Canon kit. So that is worth having a look at. I'm not going to explain the themes. You need to look at the website, but it's called Canon Redline. There's another competition in Photography News, the latest issue, and that is to win a Vanguard carbon fiber travel tripod. And you enter that, it's free via our website. All you have to do is answer a very, very simple question. So there are a few contests in the issue, but elsewhere, there's a review of the Fujifilm GFX 100S, which is this 102 megapixel monster that we've discussed a couple of times in the pod. Really love using it, and plot spoiler here. I recommend people buy it if you want lots and lots of megapixels and have $5,500 to spend. But it's an issue full of our usual quality content, Rog.
Fantastic. And you'll be able to find that issue. If you can't find it in stores, you can find it online. The URL for that is photographynews.co.uk. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, where the handle for those is @PhotoNewsPN. And seeing as you're listening to the Photography News podcast, it would be lovely if you could subscribe to us. We're on YouTube, Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and you just hit subscribe. And every time we get together and ramble on about photography, you'll have it delivered straight to your smartphone, ready for a listen. So moving on, after our discussion of close-ups, let's answer a couple of reader questions. Both of these two readers have sent their questions to our email address, which is podcast@photographynews.co.uk. Certainly one contentious one, which hopefully won't take too long to get the answer to, but we'll see. It comes from P. Taylor at Edenbridge, and he or she says, I'm keen to get out taking landscape photos again, and I've spent most of lockdown working on old pictures. I've definitely learned some new processing skills to make them look better, like replacing skies. My question is, where do the team draw the line in manipulation, and how far will they go? Right, Kingsley, why don't you field this one first? Manipulation, how far will you go?
Not as far as I used to, actually, I think is the answer from me. I spent a long time working on a sort of more of a creative-y sort of Photoshop themed magazine, and we used to do quite a lot of kind of wacky stuff, and partly it was in the mode of teaching people how to use Photoshop, and so the idea of replacing a sky is, to me, is absolutely fine. Like, I don't do it anymore because I'm trying to look more for realism in landscapes. But if you've got a particularly bland sky but you've got a good landscape, I still see it as a, if your purpose for that image is simply to create an image that is pleasing to you, then I think it's absolutely fine. I mean, there's a bunch of, like, I never did this myself, but I've seen people do techniques like adding rainbows to landscapes and stuff like that, and I just think that's kind of just feels like utterly pointless to me.
I know that Will mentioned on the last podcast you were testing some software, didn't you, Will, that had a sky replacement tool on it. And to me, I mean, I'm going to go against Kingsley's view in terms of, perhaps not surprisingly, that I personally think replacing skies is too much, because for the simple reason that if you've got a good landscape, then that landscape has to be good because you've got two constituent parts to it, which are the foreground and the sky. And if you're going to put a different sky in, then it's not the right picture, right? Or is that just me? Go on, Kingsley, you've got your hand up.
I think it's all about the reason for making the image. If you want to make an image, it's like if you want a kind of a photo that's real and represented the thing you were looking at the time, that's absolutely fine. If you want to make an image that you think is more successful, to more aesthetically pleasing, someone might say, well, it's not a real photo. You could say, well, it is. It's two photos. It's better than one photo. Okay. But I mean, like, I'm with you. Like, I don't do it anymore. But like, if I was making a picture for like for an illustration for someone or something like that, I would see it's a perfectly valid thing to do. But for a photo, I wouldn't do it anymore.
Will?
Well, Mr. or Mrs. Taylor does ask about drawing the line in manipulation, not specifically in landscape manipulation. But I don't think there is a line. I mean, I know this. I am a traditionalist when it comes to photography, but if you've got the power of Photoshop or Affinity Photo, whatever at your fingertips, do what the hell you want, and don't expect people to like it. That's another thing. Or don't expect people to buy it. But I wouldn't draw a line in anything. So I'd say to our listener, enjoy it. If people then take umbrage to some of the effects you make, if he or she belongs to a camera club, some people will go 3 out of 10 because it's not a very nice image. But I don't think it matters if you're doing stuff for yourself, and maybe if you want to market it, if you want to posterize or do polar shots. I think what the hell.
I'm going to say something which I'm sure is probably going to switch a lot of listeners off. But aren't some camera club members the guiltiest people of overdoing it? I mean, I'm sure there are some fine exponents of Photoshop work in camera clubs, but equally there are some ham-fisted Photoshoppers out there as well. And I seem to have seen a lot of those in camera club circles.
Well, I think you may be right in a way, Rog, but I think you're also wrong, because what happens is with camera clubs, of course, is that if they overdo it and they put it in front of a judge, and that judge says, I don't like this picture, it's only worth 3 out of 10, that photographer might stop doing it. But there are many other photographers out there beyond the realms of clubs. And for instance, HDR is a technique that, for me, I don't like it. But when you see some stuff done online, there's some very well-known photographers with thousands of followers, even more than Kingsley, on social media, who do this garish HDR stuff. Well, I think it's horrendous, but I'll go, actually, you're perfectly told to do it. And if you've got 250,000 followers with you and they're buying your work, then Christ, maybe I'm doing something wrong. So I think there's no limit to manipulation. Just don't make out that, for instance, going back to the landscape thing, don't say, I found this wonderful scene, I photographed it. Just be open and go, actually, I manipulated the hell out of this shot.
So there is no line for Will.
The line is adopted.
My line is that it shouldn't present anything different other than what you photographed in the first place. So I don't want colours changing. I don't want anything added in. Kingsley, how far? Where is your line? That's what we've been asked. I mean, if you took a picture of a Spitfire at rest on a runway, is it fine for you to then remove the wheels and the landing gear, put it up in a sky, and have a dogfight going on, and that's all fine?
I think I'm kind of going into this kind of libertarian view where it's like, I think that's absolutely fine if that's what you want to do, but don't try and pass it off as that you were hanging around in the skies of southern England in 1940 and kind of trying to pass it off as some exactly through the wonder of time traveling Photoshop. No, I mean, I think it is down to this kind of personal taste thing. And being straight up about what you've done to a picture. And like over the years, I think a bit like you were saying, Rog, I've seen too many pictures where people have kind of created effect that looks like something out of Blake 7 and are kind of going, hey, what do you think of this? And it's like, well, I hate it. But if you like it, that's cool.
So is the line then, okay, so is the line then that as you can do whatever you like as long as it's not obvious? So for example, if you've boosted shadows where there's like loads of like artifacts and all that sort of stuff, or does that not matter?
Well, I know I see. I think that's about technical proficiency rather than intent. Yeah. So like if you want to do something and you do it badly, that's a sort of a different kind of thread. I think to me it's about that kind of level of honesty. Like, we've all read these stories about people entering things into global competitions and then sort of passing off a stuffed animal as something they've taken in their Serengeti or something. Yeah. You be for real. It's not, there's no, what are you going to get out of fooling someone?
Well, based on that, then P. Taylor, be it Mr. or Mrs. or a Miss, then on the basis of the fact that you've got new processing skills to make them look better, it sounds like you can knock yourself out and do whatever you like. There is no line to draw. So let's move on to the next question and see if we can get a slightly more definitive answer. And this one comes from Claire Fox in Basingstoke, who asks, after hearing about Kingsley's weight for his Nikon grip, don't we all remember it? I was wondering what other accessories the team couldn't do without. So, Kingsley, obviously that was your grip. So let's move on to Will. Will, accessories you can't do without?
That's a challenging question, and don't know. Thinking about it, I mean, I couldn't do without my smartphone. I mean, like many people nowadays, and many photographers, I've got apps on my phone to help me achieve things. I mean, and I've bought one recently called Photo Pills, which is very well known for this sort of thing. I haven't had a chance to get out and use it because simply because I haven't been able to get out. But I think for me, one of the most powerful accessories is the smartphone, not as a camera device, but as a little portable computer to help you do stuff. And of course, coming with that is a power bank and lead. So I think that for me is pretty important. Another thing for me is L grips. I seem to have bought L grips for every camera I've got. So the L grips, as you know, are these things you just buy from well-known online retailers, in my case. And basically, they just allow me to fit it to a tripod upright and vertical or horizontal very quickly. So and these are really quite good. And we need one of these is a hex key, an Allen key, because you find that sometimes you want to take it off to replace a battery, as in the case of this camera I'm holding, which is the Fujifilm, with a grip which is not dedicated for it. And to change battery, I have to remove the thing. So I need a hex key on that. But to answer Claire's question simply, smartphone for me.
And that's just to clarify, that's not to take pictures with. No,
that's not to take pictures. No, I think, guys, what do you think? I mean, I got Claire's question out of context, but
that's for when he does his TikTok.
TikTok, I don't even know what TikTok is. Okay, well, Rog, what's your favourite accessory? What would you?
Well, I mean, I don't think I have a favourite accessory, but I think my sort of accessory that I couldn't do without, which ironically I don't yet have, is a spare battery for my camera. I've got too many examples of when I've gone out with a battery insufficiently charged, or it's been particularly cold, and that's sucked up all the last bits of battery power. So for me, it's very simple. It's a spare battery, and it's not necessarily a battery from a third-party manufacturer. It's spend a little bit more and get the actual battery from the actual manufacturer, because I have in the past bought third-party batteries and have been stung quite badly by them, taken them as a backup, put them in, and then found that they only last for a quarter of the time as the normal battery. So battery for me, Kingsley, apart from a grip.
Well, I guess the battery fits into the grip. The reason I was hanging on for that was because it was one of the reasons I bought the Z7 too, was that they finally did a dedicated vertical grip for it, and I like shooting with a vertical grip. It's just something I've kind of got used to. But it's a pretty broad question, isn't it? I've found one of the most useful accessories to be a thermos flask on various landscape things, which is just something that basically makes your experience. I mean, great accessories don't have to be things that are specifically about photography. They can just be things that make your photographic experience more comfortable and enjoyable. So like a thermos flask full of tea and a Snickers / marathon bar. But and the other thing is you can have all the accessories in the world, and I'm sure that we three all have lots of different accessories for things. The most important thing is to actually kind of take the right ones with you. I was up in the Peak District last year, and I went to put a filter holder on the front of the camera, on the front of the lens, and realised I didn't have the correct ring to put the filter holder on. So it's like, oh god. And you've probably got 3 different rings in the bag, and none of them fitted. So yeah, it's it's accessories are kind of about making things more efficient but also more pleasurable. So despite the problems with filter holders, I'm going to go for a good thermos.
Well, there we go. It strikes me, Kings, that you've probably got a very old school thermos that's got some sort of tartan based design on the outside. Is that?
I wish.
It's not a modern one, is it?
No, actually it's not. No, I think it's only about 10 years old. No, it's not one of those brilliant ones that you would see at it's kind of every roadside on the A303 down to the West Country.
Absolutely. Well, there you go, Claire. I hope that answers your question. And if you, dear listeners, have got any questions that you'd like us to have a stab at answering, then the email address, as I mentioned, is podcast@photographynews.co.uk. So as we wrap up this latest episode of the PN podcast, we would never end one without a Will's word of wisdom. So, Will, now that the lockdown is easing, have we got a related word of wisdom for that?
Well, just thinking, Roger, I mean, you mentioned the date earlier, this being the 12th of April when the shops in England are open. Sorry, non-essential shops are opening in England. And looking at the BBC website, there are queues all over the place to get them in some of these shops. But I do wonder if if that applies to photographic shops. And I wonder if my word of wisdom shouldn't be about that and actually encourage our listeners to go spend some money at their local photo retailer. If there's only need all the support we can give them. And as it's sunny today and there's a nice blue sky, if you are going out there shopping, buy yourself a polarizing filter. The single most useful filter you can buy. Cut down glare, saturate colours, cut down reflections, make blue skies better. So basically it's a two-pronged attack on my word of wisdom, Rog. Support your local photo retailer, buy yourself a polarizing filter.
Fantastic. And I think it's probably worth pointing out that at the same time as non-essential retailers opened, pubs, beer gardens are also opened. And I would strongly recommend not going to the pub beer garden first and then going to your camera retailer, because that could end up with buying something significantly more expensive than a polarizing filter. But yes, do support your local photo retailer. You should even hopefully be able to pick up a copy of Photography News in some of them in the not too distant future as well. So thank you, gentlemen. I think we're just about done. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much to contributing editor and Atomic Kitten fan Kingsley Singleton.
I haven't changed my mind. I never went for Atomic Kitten. I've realised it's Bananarama who I want.
Oh well, that's three.
Yeah.
Who was your favourite Bananarama one?
I can't remember their names. I just remember the hair and the hairspray.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Kingsley. And I'm sure Bananarama will be in touch in due course.
There you go. Yeah. Hello to Bananarama if you're listening.
And also thank you to sports fan and editor of Photography News, Mr. Will Chung.
Roger, and just to finish on Bananarama, oddly enough, the very first press conference I ever went to was an Olympus camera launch. So this is back in the 80s. And that was back in the time when Olympus used celebrities and sporting stars to promote their cameras. And we went to, I think it was Pinewood Studios or somewhere like that. And you wouldn't believe who were there. Bananarama were there. So I met them all those years ago. But lads, a pleasure as always. And I'm going to go rummage in my kitchen drawer now for some subjects.
Kingsley?
Okay, guys.
Siobhan Fahy. That's the one I've remembered.
And I remember one of them was married to Dave Stewart from Eurythmics as well, wasn't she? I seem to recall. Maybe that's wrong.
That would have been a super group, wouldn't it?
I'm sure somebody will write in and tell us otherwise. Thanks very much for listening. Thanks, chaps, and we'll speak to you again soon. Bye. That's the hooter to officially sound the end of the podcast.
To the pub.
Indeed. Looking forward to that.